Creating, redeeming, sustaining God. We are often too busy to realize with awe and wonder how intricately we are woven into the entire creation. Come to us sometimes with a sense of your majesty, your ineffability, your mystery. Remind us that there is so much more to our lives than what we notice. Remind us that we are always walking on holy ground. We ask these things through Christ who makes them possible. Amen. Is there any special sharing today?
I got some.
54th wedding anniversary yesterday.
Let's keep Phyllis and her family in our prayers.
I'd like to read you my card I got for you. A dream in your pocket, a wish in your shoes, a ribbon of stars, and a moonbeam or two. Not just for your birthday, but for all year through. I thought that was nice for my sister. And I guess we can sell into open worship now.
A few years back, I was friends with the pastor of a small church whose congregants were aging and many of them dying. She did a lot of funerals. And so she began to think a lot about funerals and memorials, about the way we practice them and how we ought to be practicing them instead. She read a lot of literature on pastoral care, on grief, on liturgy. And it began to happen that every theological conversation we had turned into a commentary on what the church did for death and what things it ought to do instead. To be honest, it got a little tiresome. I wasn't so convinced that every theological question had ramifications for the rituals of grief. I asked myself, why is this so important? Why does it matter so much whether we do a good funeral or a poor one? And then one day I just got it. I finally understood that the reason it matters whether the funeral leads us through all the right words and actions to encourage us to mourn and to know why we mourn. Why it matters that the funeral speaks truth beyond sentiment and speaks the grief that exists for the mourners. The reason that these things matter isn't because the dead need them, and it isn't necessarily even because the family and friends of the dead need them. matter because the faith of the Christian church is that life matters, that life is unique in its properties, God created and God beloved, means something when the spark of life is extinguished from this earth. The way in which we mark the passing of the dead has everything to do with the value we place on the living. We do life itself an injustice when we allow death to become unremarkable. And it's not just me saying that. That's the witness in the words of the law and the prophets and the Gospels. I confess that as a pacifist, it is difficult for me to make my peace with the way observances of Memorial Day become so often celebrations of military power rather than remembrance of the war dead. It can be difficult in our ceremonies to distinguish our grief over so many lost souls from an endorsement of the foreign policy that led them to the cemetery. But there is even another level of difficulty in remembering as a collective the men and women who died in war. And that level of difficulty is, how actually do I actively remember and grieve the death of mostly strangers in the midst of a life that takes so much of my attention? This is a reading from the Gospel of John. I am the true vine, and my Father is the vine grower. Abide in me as I abide in you. Just as the branch cannot bear fruit by itself unless it abides in the vine, neither can you unless you abide in me. I am the vine, you are the branches. Those who abide in me and I in them bear much fruit, because apart from me you can do nothing. As the Father has loved me, so I have loved you. Abide in my love. If you keep my commandments, you will abide in my love, just as I have kept my Father's commandments and abide in his love. I have said these things to you so that my joy may be in you, and that your joy may be complete. On the whole, Jesus is speaking in this passage about power and the ability that we have to continue the work of Jesus by drawing on the very same power that Jesus drew on, which is God's power. But beneath that particular encouragement, there is another text, and this is the text of unity. If those who love God are the branch and God is the vine, all the trunkness and rootedness of the vine, then we are, in all our separate individualities, part of the same whole. If one branch becomes diseased, we're all weaker, and we all benefit from the branches closest to the sun do the most photosynthesizing. It's the same kind of story and the same understanding that Paul has every time he talks about the many members of the one body. It's the same understanding that we sometimes have in worship. It's hard to speak the reality that we sometimes feel. I have a friend who once walked into a church and had an immediate vision. She saw a thick, ropey vine growing out of each person's chest and extending from each person to all the others, so that the entire congregation was connected to each other by the vine. When we are really gathered in meeting, I think that's our experience of being connected one to another by the light which is within each one of us and also all around us. That connection is inward reality of communion, and when we are gathered in that way, we are participating in communion. Around 500 years ago, John Donne wrote the same thing in words that many of us have heard. No man is an island entire of itself. Every man is a piece of the continent, part of the main. If a clod be washed away by the sea, Europe is the less, as well as if a promontory were, as well as if a dwelling of thy friends or of thy own were. Any man's death diminishes me, because I am involved in mankind, and therefore never sent to know for whom the bell tolls. It tolls for thee. Many, many years ago, a member of the meeting of which I was a member died unexpectedly. I'll call him Robert. He was a trustee and he was retired, so that he spent over half the year in Florida. When he was in Ohio, he didn't always come to meeting. So I knew that some part of the folks in the meeting would have no idea who he was, and others would never be able to get him. He was a man of strong opinions and considerable energy, and he expended a great deal of both on this community. But what would that mean for those who didn't know him? I began to realize that it would mean something to even those folks who had never met Robert. The grass at the meeting house would be longer or uncut altogether. And the lawn would be excavated repeatedly by moles whose tunnels were never crushed, punctured, or exploded by whatever new method Robert had found for taking care of moles. Robert was the one with the idea to start a small scholarship fund for meeting members, so everyone who ever received a scholarship, whether they knew him or not, was affected by his presence. Our carrions no longer had berry pie. 50 small things that kept the meeting running, from the size of the mailbox to the rate of interest on investments, were a little less well attended. The thing is, the kind of mystical, mysterious reality was that even for those who never met Robert, the meeting was marked and changed by his absence. Not all for the worse necessarily, but necessarily changed in ways that affected all of us. This is the best way that I personally can understand Memorial Day. It is not a celebration of our foreign policy and our politics, things about which we are often divided one from another and family from family. It is a memory, a recognition, a memorial of what we have lost. We have all lost, and we're united in that loss. A branch has been torn from us, a hole forced through our canopy of leaves. We will still be growing, but our shape will be different. The very difference of the shape will show us what the branch meant. The very difference of our new shape will be the branch still with us. The scar, the absence, the new shape we become, for better or for worse, are all ways in which the departed branch never really departs, whether or not we even know what we've lost. What baffles me and arouses my wonder is the way in which an absence that I don't even know about will affect me, just as a presence I don't know about can affect me. And all of these absences and presences and absences, everyone who has ever been, then not been in Fairview meeting, every new foot that steps inside or foot that leaves forever, and all of those even before the building, before New Vienna, then back before North Carolina and Philadelphia, before that to the 1652 country in England, and then maybe back to John Donne and the Church of England, and then back and back. Every one of those presences and absences that we never know have formed the world all around us and matter to us, because whether or not we knew them, they are a very part of the line in which we ourselves live and breathe and have being. Part of what it means to recognize that of God in everyone is to recognize that in some small, unequally distributed way, in a vastness we can't understand, there is some thread or vein of all of humanity, all of it past, all of it present, all even of it future, which runs through us. This is beyond my comprehension. It is also beyond my speaking about plainly, because it is the mystical oneness which is simply beyond words. This is a great deal of meaning to put into death, especially into the deaths of soldiers in far distant wars whom we will never have known, as well as soldiers in both wartime and peacetime whom we have known. And yet, every death carries this meaning, and every birth, every friendship and marriage, and every argument or leave-taking. Our lives are so fraught with meaning. We would sink under their weight if we ever paused to think about it for very long. Every so often, as on Memorial Day, we are brought face to face with it. What makes it possible to bear that weight when I am brought face to face with it? My faith that in the living stream, we are all weightless. We all float. Those we love are always in the stream with us, no matter wherever else in our lives they are no longer present. creating, redeeming, sustaining God. Remind us sometimes that we are not islands, that we are deeply connected, whether or not we feel the connection. That our lives matter, that the lives of everyone we are able to see, and of all those unseen, that their lives matter equally as ours, that all of them are lived within you and in your presence. Give us a sense sometimes of that mystery, which brings us light. We ask these things through Christ who makes them possible. Amen.